Okay, hi coaches. Today I'm honored to have Coach Bigelow here. He's an expert in coaching for grassroots basketball. So, hi Coach Bigelow.
Hello, Keith. Nice to see you
Nice to see you.
8,000 miles away or 9,000, wherever you might be.
Yes. So yeah, just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, here I am in my suburban Boston home, and it is the day after Thanksgiving for all you American viewers. It is November 27th, and I am a former NBA player who played in the late 70s against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Julius Erving and some of those guys. And somewhere about 20 or 25 years ago, when my own sons were very young and growing up, probably around the age of your son, I started getting interested in how youth and kids play sports, not just basketball, which is my background, but I decided to do a little research in the late 80s and early 90s, and having discovered that the whole tenor of kids' sports had changed since I was a kid in the 1960s, I decided to take a mission and go out to people all over the country and later all over the world and try to balance their perspective when it comes to children and sports. And of course, since my background is basketball, the whole arena of youth basketball was never far from my task and my mission. So that's what I ended up doing a lot of over the course of the last 25 years, because I am a child of the 60s, as I said, who never played youth basketball. In fact, I never played any organized basketball until I was a freshman here in American high school, which would be about 14 years old. So, which was not uncommon when I grew up. We had relatively few youth basketball programs in America at that time. So, as I tell people, I was a baseball player, I was a street hockey player, I was a touch football player. I did a lot of sports as kids, but they were almost all unorganized. It was other kids and myself playing on playgrounds and sandlots and having a blast, and we didn't know otherwise. And then around the late 80s and the early 90s, when my own children were born, I began to notice quite a difference in their childhood and my childhood. So as I wrap up this quick 90 seconds, what I have tried to do in the last 25 years is give the games back to the children, as I like to say. I have a book out there. You may or may not know about this, Keith. It's called Just Let the Kids Play. I wrote it in 2001 with a couple of very good writers helping me out. And that's what I've been basically trying to do with children for the last 25 years is, if not give them the childhood that I had in sports, at least to make it more of theirs, rather than so much adult orientation and adult domination. And my success has been, to be very honest, mixed. There are a lot of adults that don't want to give this up, even though they're the same adults that grew up the way I did. So it's kind of interesting how it's changed over the last 20, 30, 40 years. I'll leave you to your next question.
Awesome. So I'm going to tell the audience of how I found you.
Yes.
So basically I was coaching a 4th grade girls team, and I started doing stuff that was very high level for my...
Like 7th grade? High level?
Yeah. And then I completely lost them. And then I realized I don't have anything in my library suitable for that age. And on the spot, I was stuck. I couldn't think of anything. So I went home and I searched and I found your video, and you gave adults this really, really heavy green ball. And then that's when I thought, okay, this coach knows what he's doing. So tell us about,
Well, the green ball, which is 9 pounds, and where you are about 4 kilograms, the green ball came to me in one of the few moments of inspiration that I've had in the last 40 years. I was driving around, probably to a talk somewhere here in America, and I came up with the idea of how can I convince adults how difficult it is for kids to not only handle a ball or to pick one up, but actually shoot one from a rim that's way above their heads. So I picked up the 9-pound ball from a physical education catalog, and I've been using it ever since, probably about 12 or 15 years now. I open up a clinic that I do for adults with the 9-pound ball, and I make them handle it, and I make them try to make some layups. And basically what I have tried to convince adults of for years, if you're ever in a gymnasium, Keith, and I'm sure you have, where the fixed baskets are up by the ceiling because they have to lift them up for something else going on in the gym, I tell adults all the time, if you really want to know what an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old shooting a regular basketball at a 10-foot hoop is, then take one of those baskets that's way up there, 22, 23, 25 feet in the ceiling, and start shooting at it. And notice how your form will be quite compromised as you try to loft that ball up there. So the 9-pound ball serves the same function. but I've been telling adults for years, I don't know why so many of our programs at 8, 9, or 10 years old have a 10-foot basket. They should never be that tall. They should be 8 feet at the tallest. But it's been one of my very tough challenges here in America, where so many of the programs at that age do have regulation-size hoops. As I tell people, Dwight Howard is probably 6'11 and weighs 270 pounds. LeBron James is about 6'7", weighs 250, and they shoot at the same height basket that so many of our fourth graders and 10-year-olds do at this country. It makes no sense at all, but that's what happens.
So for all the youth coaches out there, what are the couple like major mistakes? So the height of the rim, too heavy of a ball, they're not using small size balls, anything else?
Yeah, I think the height of the rim is a bigger problem. A lot of the youth programs in the world do use smaller balls, so they've adapted that. But the one that really drives me nuts, even as much as the height of the rims, that probably drives me more nuts than any, are the number of players on the court who are playing. Now, Keith, I don't know what your background is in other sports. We have a sport here, baseball. You're familiar with that. In the brand name youth baseball in this country, although there are several brand names now, is called Little League. Little League Baseball, which is all around the world. And if you're familiar with late August, we have a Little League World Series in Pennsylvania, where we invite 8 domestic teams from the U.S. and 8 international teams to play in the Little League's World Series for 10 days in late August. Well, if you are familiar with the dimensions of baseball, 90 feet are the base paths here for older folks, including Major League Baseball. The pitching distance where they throw is about 60 feet. The Little League distance is smaller. It was developed 75 years ago by the guy who founded Little League. So they have a 60-foot, so 2/3 of the base paths of the olders, and about 2/3, they have about a 40, 45-foot pitching distance. Now, these are very much good dimensions, and they were developed 75 years ago. And it follows what I call the child development and physical education rule of thumb, which is you never adapt the kids to the game. You always adapt the game to the kids, which is what 8-foot baskets are, not 10-foot baskets. You're adapting to their specific age group and their special lack of strength or whatever that is. Youth soccer, which I'm sure is a sport you have in China and Hong Kong, oftentimes is played most of the time below age 11 years old with small-sided games. They don't play 11 versus 11 on fields that are 110 by 70 yards. They will play 4 versus 4 or 6 versus 6 on smaller fields so kids get more touches. I have been trying to drum into people's brains for years, why are we playing 5-on-5 in youth basketball? Why aren't we playing 3-on-3? Which, by the way, was a suggestion given to me 25 years ago by a youth soccer guy who had a doctorate in child development. And I had never thought of it in that way before. All of us played 3-on-3 as kids. When you had one basket and 6 kids, you played 3-on-3. But I'd never thought of it in the context of younger kids. But if you think about it, it is so much a better game because there are fewer kids to mess up the game. They each get a better chance to share the ball, and you can put 2 half-court games on a full court and have 12 kids playing at once with 2 balls. And you can do the math, Keith, you know, just more and more touches. But trying to get people out of the 5-on-5 full court, that's as hard as trying to get them off 10-foot hoops. They just don't get it because what do they see on TV? What do they see in their local high schools? They see 5-on-5 full court, and they don't understand why we could make some changes and actually adapt it to the kids. So, yep, I'm still working on this stuff, Keith, and I probably will be till I'm about 90 years old.
Awesome. So one small point, can you point the camera a little lower? Yeah, that's better.
Sorry. Okay, that's good. Okay,
that's fine.
Yeah, you're
so
probably
you're
getting
saying
me from the nose up. I keep doing this. Sorry to keep rattling. I'm trying to hold it on my leg.
So you're saying maximize touches by using more small-sided games. Everyone has a ball. Yep. That kind of theory.
The soccer people in this world have known this for 40, 60 years. Okay, in America, we finally adapted about 30, 35 years ago. We had really not been a youth soccer playing country for more than 40 years. But once the kids started playing at 6 years old and 7-year-old, 11 versus 11 on huge fields, then somebody got the idea is that this is not right because the kids touch the ball once an hour when they're on the field. So I've used some of this method to help change some youth programs here in America. But it's very tough. It's like the 10-foot hoop. A lot of people don't want to change.
So one of this biggest problem I have, personal question with coaching, is that the girls don't have enough strength to shoot it like how everyone keeps it really high the proper way. They can't shoot it that high. They keep shooting from the hip. How do we teach them to shoot if they don't have the strength?
Well, okay. Well, one of the things that I've suggested for years, which goes against the grain of a lot of what we teach, is two-handed shooting. Which, by the way, was done in this country probably until about 1955, 60 years ago. And the reason two-hand shooting works with younger kids is they get an extra shoulder, an extra upper arm, and an extra lower arm to propel the ball. And, Keith, they can keep it in front of their head when they shoot. What happens, as you know, with younger kids, when the basket's too far away or too high, or both, is they end up launching the ball from their hip. And that is one of the hardest skills to break once they get up to an age where they do have the strength and coordination to lift it. Now, one of the problems with your release point, and I'm going to hold you with my left hand and I'm going to see if you can shoot, is your release point can vary even amongst high-level pros. In fact, Stephen Curry does not have a really high release point on his shot, as opposed to other people in the NBA. What he really has is a quick release, as we all know. So whether the release point is here or there or another 2 inches higher, to me, has never been bothersome. I'm more interested in footwork and what's going on below the waist than I am what's going on here. But if we're getting this down to younger kids who are 10, 11, 9 years old, then I don't worry about release points at all. I'm just trying to move the ball towards the front of their bodies. Because if the basket's too high, the basket's too far, then you get, if you can see what I'm doing here, you're getting the push and the heave. As a friend of mine called it years ago, a heave thrown in the general direction of the basket. Or another friend of mine from Connecticut, I loved it, called them anvil tossing jockeys. And you've seen your fair share if you've been coaching fourth graders. You know what an anvil is. It's very heavy, and they fire it from their hip, and it's hilarious and kind of cute. But it doesn't help with the shooting. But as long as we play younger and younger basketball in this world, we're going to have kids with messed up mechanics. And I don't worry about it now as much as I did even 20 years ago, because I know they're going to grow out of it. And a lot of kids make the adjustments as they get up to 11, 12, 13 years old. They finally get big enough. And by the way, your theory about girls being weaker than boys, actually until 12 and a half, girls are taller and heavier than boys at all the age groups. So they're really no less, really no, some are weaker than others. But a lot of boys are pretty small too at these ages. So they're going to end up heaving the ball too.
Awesome. So then on that point, so a lot of the issues I had was strength related, right? You
Yes.
don't believe in single-handed passes for that young of an age.
Well, I don't like single-handed passes, even at the high school level here with the 14 to 18-year-olds, because if you're getting closely guarded and you're throwing a one-hand pass and that defender's arm gets in your way at the last moment, you have no way to withdraw that pass. Now, let's face it, if you've got the hands of LeBron James or some really big hands or, Tim Duncan, you can take that pass. I'm sorry, as I'm mentioning, you can take that ball and just leave the ball in your hand. So I am a big fan of two-hand passing all the way through high school, through 18 years old, because the kids can't withdraw the pass if the defensive hand comes there at the last moment. So two hands on every pass. Yeah, and by the way, even with two hands, a lot of these kids don't have a whole lot of control over the ball, as you well know. So, yes,
And then
big fan of that.
You touched a little bit on footwork, and I saw in your videos you progressed from just really basic things. I mean, okay, it's basic, but for someone that's been doing a lot of high school stuff, you forget to how fundamental things are. Like you start with just running and stopping and running and then just pivoting without a ball, and then you progress to having a ball and pivot. So, like, what kind of footwork? What is footwork?
Okay, I think it's important, Keith, that your audience gets a little background of this and what I've studied over the last 25 years. This is a very difficult sport to play for the very simple reason we have two rules that really run against the grain when it comes to kids learning basketball. Number one is traveling, and number two is double dribbling. The children at these ages do not have the bodies, they don't have the skills, they don't have the coordination to really run all that fast and control the ball while they're dribbling. And that, to me, is what separates kids from teenagers from adults, is by the time they get into upper teenage years, they now have better coordination and their ability to control their running speed along with catching the ball and dribbling the ball and passing the ball while they're on the run. as you well know, having coached fourth grade girls, you know that whole thing goes right out the window with those kids. As soon as you end up moving them at a faster speed and ask them to pass it to each other or dribble, then the ball's apt to go out the window, go out the door. It's going to hit people in the face. It's going to hit people in the legs. So to me, the biggest challenge at these ages is teaching them how to slow down and come under control. And that's why when you saw it in the film, in the video, why you saw so much direction, paid attention to the ability to slow down and stop and be under control and pivot. And as I tell people all the time, this is not something that's going to be accomplished in 2 weeks. This may be something that's accomplished in 5 or 6 years. But a lot of people don't have that kind of patience. And one of the things I often talk to programs about is their officiating. If you're planning on officiating this game like you would officiate a game 5 years older, forget it. That game is going to take 3 hours to play, and it's going to be very frustrating for everybody involved. So your officials have to be very cognizant of what advantage and disadvantage is. So if that kid catches the ball and takes 2 innocuous steps or 3 innocuous steps but doesn't go anywhere, don't call the travel. Now, if the kid takes 6 steps or 8 steps with the ball, then they're probably gaining an advantage, and that's when you'll have to blow the whistle. But it is the toughest thing to officiate. I've refereed hundreds of games at this level, and the real special sauce is how much can you let go without harming or hurting the potential and what the kids will know about violations. And the second piece of that being, keeping the game moving. Because if you end up blowing the whistle for all the right reasons, to technical violations and everything, you will have a 3-hour game. And no one's going to sit through one of those.
Awesome. Coach, I need the camera a little lower.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Awesome. No, it's fine. So I know you hold clinics, and then so this is my question. So at high school level, you can practice plan to the T, to the minute, and then have all these really complicated things. But youth is a little hard. Like, how do you practice plan? What goes in your head? What are your favorite drills that always work at your clinic or your training?
When you practice plan for younger kids, and I learned this from the soccer guys, this is not my idea, but I adapted from soccer, is I always look at it in thirds. So let's say you have an hour to practice. So 20 minutes would be spent in the first 20 minutes, every kid with the ball. You have to have the same amount of balls that the kids have. You never have one less ball than kid, because that's a kid without a ball. I stole that from the soccer people. If you've ever seen a soccer practice, there's always enough balls for every kid on the team. So every kid needs a ball. And then that's where you do the ball handling, the dribbling, the passing off the wall, some of the stuff, if you've seen my videos. Do a lot of that individual stuff the first 20 minutes. The next 20 minutes is what I call small-sided games, which is what soccer taught me. Instead of playing 5-on-5, you play 2-on-2 or 3-on-3. And you let the kids move, you let them cut, you tell the defense to back off a bit, so you let the offense get ahead a bit, just so they can pass and make passes. And then the last 20 minutes of the practice, if you're playing 5-on-5, which as you already know I hate, at 3rd and 4th grade, I'd rather have 3-on-3, then you have to have a 5-on-5 scrimmage, controlled by the coach, to let the kids know this is what you're doing with 10 kids in one ball. So I always break up the practice basically 3 ways. So every kid with the ball, first 20 minutes, small-sided games the next 20 minutes, and then full-sided 5-on-5 if that's what indeed you're playing, which I hate, as you know. So, and then within those elements, generally my rule of thumb is unless something's working really well, is never go more than 5 minutes with any one segment of that. Move on, keep going. And if you need some explanation, and some of these things might need a 2-minute explanation, just make sure the kids are doing a lot of running before the explanation, so they tire a bit, and then they may slow down and listen to you for those 2 minutes. But children at the elementary school ages tend to crash and burn, elementary school being kindergarten to 5th grade in this country, which would be about 5 to 11 years old. So you got to keep them active, you got to keep them moving, plenty of water, plenty of movement, and relatively little lecturing and talking, which I've gotten better at over the last 25 years of my life, because I like to lecture and talk. But sometimes it's less talking and more moving with the kids, because that's how they discover how to play, is by doing and making mistakes and doing again. So that's my basic rule of thumb for youth practices. High school practices, I've run those. I've run college practices. They'd be a little different. But remember, your span of attention on the kids you're coaching is a lot better. when they're 14, 16, 18, and 20 than when they're 10, as you know. Their span of attention is about 5 seconds, maybe 10 at that age. So,
So one of the problems I had is that, so let's say I coach a uh, varsity boys team, and then obviously they're
okay.
all competitive. You don't really need to
Yep.
manage them at all. But the girls team, they're like, today I don't feel like listening to you, or like not putting in effort at all. How do I deal with that, or I just let that slide?
Yeah, well, part of the recognition of a coach is knowing who you're coaching. And obviously, if you're coaching 16 to 18-year-old boys, it's a bit different than coaching 10-year-old girls. So, but anybody who would be coaching these kids in a classroom would also know this. Of course, you're teaching 17-year-olds math a lot different than you're teaching 10-year-old math. So you've got to go with the raw material you're dealing with. In your case, 10-year-old, 9-year, 10-year-old girls. So what you've got to do is keep a smile on your face, keep it fun, keep it moving, and making sure they're touching the ball all the time. So relatively little downtime. Obviously, you got to give them some so they can catch a breath. But at the same time, you want action-packed practices that last an hour. And when they go home, they're feeling good about themselves. And they go home and tell mom, geez, we were really moving. We were really doing this. I made a shot. I made a dribble. And that didn't, I want to come back next time. That's the thing. Obviously, at the high school level, you've got different criteria. And you've got different missions and different goals. So, but it's hard. Too many people in our country, and I'm sure it happens elsewhere, do the coaching, the one size fits all. Well, I'm going to coach the 10-year-olds the same way I coach the 15-year-olds, and it doesn't work. You've got to be able to adjust. So, Keith, you've adjusted. You've had to.
So a big challenge that I had is, high school is easy to find new material to incorporate because there's a wealth of stuff online that you can look for. But actually, I found it really, really hard to look for your stuff, And I don't know how you came up with all these cool drills. Like, you thought about the drill where they're on their knees and dribbling because,
Yes.
maybe they get too tired just in that position at their age. Like, how do you get so creative? Did you steal this from somebody, or did you?
Well, part of it's borrowed, Keith. Part of it's, it's like the 9-pound ball. I mean, that was sort of a source of inspiration that came up 15, 20 years ago. But I'll be honest, the fellow that I ran into 25 years ago, who's brilliant, the child development PhD, who's a soccer guy, when I started talking to him, I started looking at the sport of soccer. And I am one of the biggest thieves you've ever known when it comes to adapting drills and activities from other sports. I've taken stuff from Frisbee. I've taken some from soccer. I've taken stuff from ice hockey, not a sport that's probably over where you are that much. So I'm always looking outside the box. I mean, I've been a basketball player and a basketball coach for over 40 years. So I know just about everybody in the darn game. And I've got a million drills, of which 999,000 I've forgotten. But what I did with the kids is the first rule of thumb that I always use is this is not a basketball thing. This is a child development thing. What is better for the child's child development? Not basically this is a drill that, people do at 15 years old and 20 years old. So a lot of the stuff like dribbling while on your knee and that sort of thing, that was purely child development because obviously a child or me on my knees is going to be down at the height of a child who is a third grader or an 8-year-old. But basically what I'm doing is I'm helping the adults understand that these children have different sets of capabilities. And you've got to meet them where they live, not have some sort of drill that your high school coach gave you 20 years ago. And that's one of the problems. One of the things I've said for years, Keith, is way too many people watch ESPN when it comes to try to learn basketball. Well, it's all nice and good. We can watch two major college powerhouse teams play each other on ESPN, but there's nothing there that's going to help you as a fourth grade coach fourth graders. So that's what I'm constantly telling the coaches, watch it for entertainment, but don't watch it to learn something that's going to help you. You'd much rather talk to your local physical education teacher or a child development expert. And that's what I've done. I got away from talking to basketball people because so many don't understand the needs of third graders and 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds. They're good at what they do at the upper levels, but they don't necessarily have any sort of clue about how to teach fifth graders. They all say, we'll teach fundamentals. Well, there's too many people in this world that think of fundamentals a 1-3-1 half-court defense. That's not a fundamental. but people found out they can win with it if they play at 12 years old. So that's the big challenge, is you got to agree on what fundamentals are first. And to me, a fundamental is sitting on your knees or on your belly or whatever, dribbling the ball 2 inches from the ground. That helps kids understand the progressions.
So my final question is, how
Okay.
come you are, with your background, you could coach at any level. How come you are interested in this age level in particular?
Okay, well, Keith, you hit me where I live. I've often told people for the last 30 years here in America, we've had the most unbelievable run-up of money in basketball. You know, if you think what Michael Jordan, on the heels of Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, what kind of money and value he brought to the game of basketball. And today it's just unbelievable. I often tell people, geez, I never hitched onto that train 30 years ago, got into college coaching, etc. I have a very good friend who did coach in college. He played with me in college when I played over 40 years ago. And he was teasing me about 25 or 30 years ago, Bob, why don't you coach in college? You'd be terrific. You've got so much to offer and yada, yada, yada. And by that time, I was moving into the youth. And I had seen, I guess I had seen a loophole in the game of basketball, because youth basketball was growing very quickly, but you didn't have enough people that understood the kids and how to teach it and how to coach it. So instead of going into the coaching world at high school or college or pro, I decided to take a different tack. And I decided to do something on my own and try to figure it out. And what you've seen is probably 25 good years and 30 good years of work with the videos and the books and the stuff that I've done on YouTube. And so I just decided to take a different professional address. Now, from a family situation, my boy, the one who answered the phone here, he's 28 years old. So 25 years ago, he was 3, and I have a 23-year-old, and 25 years ago, he wasn't even around. So I decided to stay. My wife is a longtime college swimming coach. She's been doing this for 40 years. She coaches at a local university, Tufts, where, by the way, we have kids from Hong Kong and China who go to Tufts. And so she's been there. So it was part of a family situation, too. If I'd been a college coach, I probably would have been moving up the ladder, so to speak. So it was a quality of life thing as much as it was a void that I thought needed filling in the world of basketball. So that's a long-winded answer, which most of my answers are long-winded, to your question. So it's been a good last 25 or 30 years. So I probably didn't make the kind of money that I would have made, say, college coaching, but it's been fun trying to change things and get in the heads of folks and get them to understand the game from the kid standpoint, not from our 40, 50, 60-year-old adult standpoint, which is my biggest challenge.
So to all the coaches out there, I personally watched DVDs by Coach Bigelow, and I can say they are amazing. They're huge paradigm shifter, because you realize.
Well, I hope so. They've been out about 5 or 6 years now, and I'm glad you like them. If the coaches out there want to go, they can go to breakthroughbasketball.com. Joe and Jeff Hafner, good buddies, who, by the way, I've never met. I've talked to them on the phone many times. It's a Midwestern U.S. Basketball products website. They've been around about 10 years. And Joe Hafner contacted me about 7 or 8 years ago because he was very interested in my world of youth sports and what I was doing. And we decided to put together these 3 DVDs. And we've talked about adding, one of these days maybe I'll add another one somewhere along the way, but it is pretty much what I call profound common sense is what I do. And I'm just trying to drum it into folks that 3-year-olds are different than 6-year-olds, who are different than 9-year-olds, who are different than 15-year-olds. And along the way, you've got to treat them as such, as you have so poignantly pointed out with your 4th grade girls, who are different than your 11th grade boys. So, but you're learning all the time, which is good, Keith. This is good for you. And eventually you'll be a wise adult soul like me, or maybe just burned out or something.
Yeah, so I know Coach Bigelow also runs clinics in the U.S. I highly recommend attending those and getting his book as well. So thank you so much, Coach.
As I tell people all the time, please invite me. By the way, if you want to contact me, as I tell people all the time, you can go to my website, which is www.bob-bigelow.com, or my email address, which is bob-bigelow@comcast.net, if they want to connect with me. And would love to hear from anybody, even in China. I've already been to Australia. I've been to New Zealand. I've been to Turkey. So I've done some of this stuff outside the U.S. too, which is always fun. Although I'm still trying to learn the one word of Turkish.
All right, that's it then. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome, Keith. Thank you for having me.